Okay, so this is going to be a monster video, a werewolf slash beastman video, because a beastman or a werewolf was a concept in the ancient world. And I'm going to be talking about the literalism and the symbolism behind it. I'm going to be talking about Greek stuff. I'm going to bring up the Gilgamesh, and I'm obviously connected all to the Bible, and the deeper meaning behind the beastman. Alright, so let me ask you something. What is something that all of these monsters have in common? There's vampires, werewolves, mummies, zombies, Frankenstein, skeleton people, ghosts. Okay? What are something all these monsters have in common? At some point, they all used to be human, right? So you keep that in mind when I make this video. They represent humans in some ways, right? They all used to be human at some point. Alright, so apparently in ancient Greece there is a Mount Lycaon. If you don't know what Mount Lycaon is, it's where they used to do the sacrifices to Zeus. Okay, and Mount Lycaon literally means wolf. And apparently there is a wolf cult there. There was a wolf cult there. And they were apparently turning into wolves. Okay, and then, so of course, this is a part of real history. Of course, people think this is symbolism. And I'm going to actually talk about the symbolism and the literalism. Alright, so most of this is coming from an ancient geographer named Pausanias. He was a historian, but he's really a geographer. And most people use his stuff, kind of like lots of people use Herodotus for stuff. He was more of a geographer, and he would go to these ancient sites. He died in 180 AD. He wasn't alive in the BCs, obviously, but he gathered information about geography and what these people were doing on these mountains. Okay, so it's very important for everyone to know that these people weren't just doing these sacrifices in actual temples. They were using real mountains. Alright, so on this mountain, there is an altar, an ash mound to Zeus. That's still there. You can still see it. And they would do sacrifices to Zeus on top of this mountain. And Pausanias says, he said there were before they had the regular sacrifices to regular Zeus, there was a wolf version of Zeus that people were worshipping a long time ago. Okay, so like in the later generations, they went and dug up some of this mountain, and then it turns out he was right. There appears to have been some sort of wolf cult there, and this is scary, but the symbolism behind this is actually really important too. And most people will say this is just symbolism. So obviously, everyone knows that there is a certain group of people who actually do claim to be turning into wolves. That's what the Native American stuff, right? That scary Skinwalker stuff. So maybe these guys were doing the exact same witchcraft, okay? And I'm gonna compare some things real fast, and I'm not gonna get too involved with the witchcraft stuff, but because I'm gonna more talk about the symbolism behind it, which is really, really important. But I will very briefly go over something I wanted to go over. So apparently they would go into these baths. They would go in a man, and they would come out a wolf, and then have to go into the wilderness. Okay. So, and then when they wanted to come back, they had to wait 9 years, and they would have to come back and go back, and then go back into the water and become a man again. Okay, so it's very creepy because in Chaco Canyon, they have the same looking baths. Okay, it's not funny, it's very scary. So maybe, and I've actually been to Chaco Canyon a long time ago, and if you'd ask these people why they have these baths or these round mounds, no one's gonna know. Okay, they don't know. But if they're doing the same witchcraft, it would explain why they have these big bath looking things, because they are probably doing the very literal version of this creepy ritual. But now let's talk about the symbolism. So let's go over the ritual again. They would take off their clothes, go into the bath, and come out as a wolf. And of course, all of this stuff is in movies. Like in the 300, he goes into a bath, he goes into the wilderness, he goes into the bath, and he comes out. Of course, in this version, it's not a monster, it's a god. Okay, but it's literally these rituals are in movies, is my point. And actually, all these concepts are in every movie. But okay, so you can see that maybe that's what was happening in these cave depictions in Chaco Canyon. It looks like the same thing. It looks like they were going into these pools and coming out as scary monster wolves and scary monsters. Okay, I'm gonna use the word monsters, but you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about skinwalkers and shapeshifters. Okay. I already made a video about this. If there's anywhere in the Bible where there's a group of men that were actually shape-shifting, actually the very, very dark version of the beast in the wilderness, if they were actually shapeshifters, it was the Amalekites. I already talked about that in this video, okay? And it's so crazy because I just recently found out this information that yes, these guys were, in the ancient world, they were considered witches and shapeshifters. Okay, the Amalekites were in the Old Testament. They were the very first group of people that the Israelites fought, and I go over why I thought they were shapeshifters, and it ended up being true, because that in other ancient texts they are shapeshifters. That's very evil and scary. But I believe that God uses the Amalekites to explain many things. He uses the Amalekites for all kinds of reasons. Okay, it's layered information. But in that video, I already talked about the very dark version of literally becoming some sort of monster, alright? Anyway, now let's talk about the symbolism behind this. So these historians are obviously not going to believe this, and quite frankly, it's up to you if you think these guys were really doing this or not, okay? So, and also Pausanias mentioned in his studies that there was also supposedly this guy, this young Olympic athlete named DeMarcus, who was turning into a wolf during the Olympic Games. And he had to be that way for 9 years. And the rumor is, if you didn't want to be a werewolf anymore, if you didn't want to be a beast man anymore, you had to go through like a 9-year trial and tribulation. And if you didn't eat humans or something like that, you were able to become a man. Okay. So the literalism could be very true. It depends on how fringy you want to get and how creepy you want to get. Symbolism is actually really, really important. Okay, so in Greece, it was very degrading for a human to lower his status to like a dog or a wolf. It was and you were not supposed to be wearing animal skins. You were supposed to wear like linens. Okay, so this was like a downgrade, and there are several different reasons why this would happen. If they were the symbolism behind a person wearing an animal pelt and going out into the wilderness, is something that happened, is something that everyone does. So the symbolism is, if you were, first of all, if they would exile you, they would probably do this. Okay, if you got in trouble, or if you had to prove yourself when you did something wrong, they would probably send you out into the wilderness until you learned your lesson, and they'd bring you back, and then you were able to come back if you learned your lesson for 9 years. Okay, and then there is also a thing that people everywhere used to do across the world. It's when they send out their young children into the wilderness to become a man, okay? All right, and sometimes they'd dress like the animals, and sometimes they would fight a beast, or they would slay a beast, or sometimes they would be friends with the beast, okay? And it was all about conquering the wild, all right? It was about conquering the wilderness and becoming a man. And if you're worthy, you came back alive, you were a man. That's a theme throughout the whole everywhere, okay? And the whole concept was, are you worthy to be a part of the kingdom? Okay, it was either a form of punishment or a right, a birthright to become a man. And all of these things are in the Bible. Okay, first of all, let's go over again. They would have to wear animal pelts to go out into the wilderness because they got in trouble. They were being exiled, or they had to learn how to conquer the wilderness. They would usually wear an animal pelt to blend in with the wilderness, to make themselves look dangerous, okay, to blend in, or they would prove that they slayed the beast by wearing the animal pelt. Like, look at me, or they bring the head. I slayed the beast, I have the head, I have the pelt, I conquered the beast, I conquered the wilderness. But sometimes you'd make friends with the people in the wilderness, right? You would actually, in some of these epics and some of these movies, you actually become part with the beasts, okay? That is literally what happened to Adam and Eve, okay? They had to put on animal skins, and they did something very bad. They were in exile, and they had to go out into the wilderness and prove that they can redeem themselves, and they could prove that they could conquer the beasts. And that's obviously a theme throughout the whole Bible. So, you would cut off the beast's head and wear its pelt to prove that you were worthy, and you would do it to blend in with everyone else. And then that literally is what happened with David, okay? Listen to me. David slayed the beast. He cut off its head. And now listen to me. David took Goliath's armor. Okay, he obviously didn't skin Goliath alive and take his head, but he did cut off his head, and he took his armor, Okay, and then for a little while, he was hiding in with the Philistines. He was disguised as them. Okay, he was like in a sheep and wolf clothing. And then there was Samson who wrestled the lion. Okay, he wrestled the lion, and he had to solve some riddles too. Okay, and then the most obvious one is slaying Leviathan. The Bible says you have to cut off Leviathan's head. You have to slay the beast. Also, a whole nother reason why you would go out and slay a monster was that you were trying to feed your family, right? So you have to bring home. Sometimes you have to bring home the whole beast so the family can eat, and that's a theme in the Bible. You slay Leviathan, and then you're supposed to eat him. The Bible says he becomes a banquet. He becomes a meal for the family. Okay, so that is a constant theme in everywhere. You have a young man or a group of young men were sent out into the wilderness to prove that they were men and to redeem themselves. So everyone has this. In Australia, it's called going on a walkabout. Okay, in the Amish do that. The Amish send their young children out to prove. They send them out into the real world to prove that they can come back and be Amish. Everyone has something like that. So it's very possible that these Greek people were doing that, and the Greeks were doing that literally, and they would even do it with the women too. I'm really going to point that out. Okay, so keep that in mind when I read some of these Bible passages. I'm going to talk about Elijah and the bears. So Elijah came across a group of young men and out in the wilderness, because that's where Elijah was. He was out in the wilderness, right? He was in the wild. And he came across a group of young men who are probably going on a walkabout, who are probably on the mission of becoming a man. But what happened? The bears ate them. Okay, obviously, you can slay the beast or the beast can eat you. So obviously, I think that's what's going on in these Bible passages. And why did they fail their mission? Because they started making fun of Elijah, right? You want to go outside, go in the wilderness to slay a beast, and you're making fun of God. Those beasts are probably going to end up eating you, okay? And there's some deep metaphors in here. What did I just say? I said young men can hunt women, right? Sexually, right? They can go out in the town and go to the bar and be on the prowl. Okay, that's a metaphor, because what did I just say? I said back then that the women were like bears, okay? So there's a metaphor here. You hunting women, thinking it's really cool and stuff, that's what you do at a bar or whatever, is evil, right? Alright? Okay. And obviously, the biggest obvious one is when Jesus went out into the wilderness. It was like a rite of passage that everyone has to do. And he met the beast, which in this case it was literally the devil. And he conquered the beast, okay? And that's very revelatory. It's very possible that Jesus was a very young man when this happened. He was probably like maybe 14, 13, okay? Okay, so let's go back to the Greek again. I know I'm repeating myself, but I'm really trying to drill these concepts in, because I'm gonna build on them in a minute, okay? So again, the Greeks would send their children out, okay, for 9 years to prove that they were a man, and they would do it with the women too. The women were dressed like bears though. And if they did a good job, they didn't have to be a beast anymore, and they were allowed to wear their regular clothes, right? They sent them over, and they had to conquer the beast. They had to conquer the wilderness. And they had to do it for 9 years. Okay, now get a load of this. That's the exact same thing that happened with King Nebuchadnezzar, okay? Okay, so let's read these lines from Daniel about King Nebuchadnezzar turning into a beast, okay? And they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass of the ox, and 7 times shall pass over thee. He was driven from men. He was separated from people. He had to go out. He was separated from everyone else, just like I've been telling you. He was in exile mode, and he had to become a beast man for how long? It says 7 years. 7 times 7. God, remember it says God turned him into a beast man. Okay, he turned him into a beast man. And if you read it, King Nebuchadnezzar had to stay that way for 7 years. And then if he learned his lesson, he was allowed to come back. It's literally the same concept. And I'm going to talk about the 9 years and 7 years. Okay, he had to go through a 7-year tribulation to prove that he could conquer the beast and come back into the kingdom of God. So in the Greek, and people always went on 9 years. That's a long time to send your kid out into the wilderness. Because 9, it wasn't literal. 9 in Greek meant like completion, fulfillment. Okay, it meant fullness. So the letter 9 just meant they had to go out as long as it took. Okay, if they didn't get killed, as long as it took as long as it took. That's exactly the same thing in the Hebrew. 7, the number 7 meant as long as it took. Okay, however long it took you to learn your lesson. Okay, before the beast ate you, though. Okay, there's a time limit. Okay, so that's very odd. There's an obvious connection. Okay, and also, what's the difference? So, in the crooked version of the story, you have 9 years, and God's version, you have 7 years. Right? What's the connection there? The devil wants you to think you have more time, right? Satan wants you to think you have all the time in the world to repent and get good with God when you actually only have 7 years, or you actually have a less amount of time. All right, and that is a huge. That is true. People think they have all the time in the world to repent when you actually their time is near. All right. So obviously you can use these monsters or slaying the beast about the devil, but sometimes, like just like in real life and just like in these movies, sometimes the wild beast doesn't need to be killed, it needs to be tamed. Okay, we're just talking about other people, right? And sometimes it's about even you becoming friends with the beast, and I'm going to use movie references to explain this. Okay, so let's read this Bible passage real fast. For thou shalt be in league with the stones of the field, and the beasts of the field shall be at peace with thee. Okay, so I think how I'm going to approach this is I'm going to bring up some stuff from the Gilgamesh. Okay, the Gilgamesh is a really old story. Anyway, I'm going to bring up some points in here. So in this story, a king is in big trouble and he gets exiled, just like King Nebuchadnezzar. He gets put out in the wilderness. He gets pushed out of his kingdom. Okay, and he meets a beast man. Okay, and he wrestles with the beast man. Okay, and then what happens is they become friends and they become partners. They become in league with each other, and then they go fight at the other beasts in the wilderness. Okay, of course you can look at this in a couple different ways. Of course, you're not supposed to join the devil and fight people. Okay, because that's been happening since the beginning of time. You're not supposed to become in league with the devil and fight everyone else. Okay, but let's look at this in a different way. First of all, there's parallelism on purpose. Okay, the Bible is designed to help these people. So yes, God was using similar stories and concepts to try to save these people. So yeah, there's a story in the Bible where a beast and a king are wrestling. And this version, the beast is going to be the people. Okay, so get a load of this. Okay, so in this story, God wrestles with Jacob, and what happens to Jacob? Jacob breaks his leg, or breaks a part of his leg, and then they become friends. Okay, almost the exact same story. What's the message here? Because in real life, you can break animals, and they can be part of your army, right? Exactly what's going on. Just like how you can break an animal, you can break a horse, and you and the horse can go fight the enemy. God was breaking you, he was breaking Jacob. That's why he said he broke his leg. He was breaking him because he was a wild beast before, and now they're friends, and they're gonna go fight the enemy, right? That is a version of what's going on here. Okay, and that's funny because in real life, when you break a horse, they have to lift up their leg, right? When you know the horse is broken, when they can lift up their feet, that's how you know the horse is broken. It's the leg isn't literally being broken, but that's how you know you broke the horse. And also in real life, they don't do this anymore, but back in the day, back in biblical times, they literally had to break one of the legs on the sheep if they were being bad, so they would have to be forced to follow everyone else. Is that a coincidence? No. So God broke Jacob. It meant that he broke him to be not a wild beast anymore. And then just like in real life, when you break an animal, you give them a name, okay? Because wild beasts in the field don't have names. And that's literally what happened to Jacob. God says, you're no longer heel snatcher, which is totally the name of a dog, by the way. Okay, a wild dog. You are no longer heel snatcher. You are Israel. Because God is claiming him as a broken animal in the field, and now he's his. He gave him his name. Okay, I'm going over several different concepts and things in the Bible, but just like in real life, Okay, sometimes those beasts out there are actually the good guys. Just like in the movies, sometimes those bad guys are actually the good guys. Alright? And just like in these movies, sometimes those things out in the wilderness actually help you and become your friend. I'll just use some examples. Okay. So let's talk about the Greek version. We'll go back to the basics again. So in the Greek culture, to wear animal skins, it was a very lowly thing to do. And in the Greek culture and some of the biblical culture too, only poor people wore animal skins. Outcasts wore animal skins. They were out there by themselves. They were like hermits too, okay? Only people outside of the kingdom wore animal skins. Okay? And that's so funny because that's why Elijah was depicted as being a wild man and he was wearing animal skins. Both Elijahs were outcasts. Okay? Both Elijahs were living in caves. They're wearing animal skins, so that can indicate that they were outcasts and they were very poor and they were by themselves. You can maybe even say they were lone wolves. Okay? But they actually chose to be that way, okay? Because now let's talk about how these animals were living at these beasts were living at peace with them. Okay, so Elijah was out in the wilderness by himself. He was all by himself, and the only friends he had were crows who were feeding him. He was at peace with the crows. And it's so funny because crows are an unclean animal, right? They're at peace with him. And there's Elijah with his bears. He was hanging out with the bears. Okay? He was out living in the bears. So sometimes being friends with the beast is a theme in the Bible, okay? Because they chose to be. And then there was Jonah and the whale. Okay, some people think the whale was actually protecting him in his mouth. So I'm going to go ahead and use that for this video, okay? So there was Jonah and the whale. He was at peace with the whale. We're going to bring up some Disney movies. Just like when Simba gets cast out, it's the same exact theme. He gets thrown out of his kingdom, Simba, and he meets some outcasts out there, and they become his friends. Okay, they're like, it's so funny because these are all unclean animals, right? It's just like when Cinderella didn't have any friends. Her best friends were rats. You get what I'm saying? It's like the same thing. Okay, we'll do one more. There was Snow White. She was outcast in the wilderness. She was thrown out into the forest. And then she meets some outcasts, some little people, and her best friends became the little people. And then there was Bambi, his best friend was a skunk. And then there was Dumbo, who his best friends were literally crows. And then there was Sleeping Beauty, and her best friends were some old ladies. And what's my point? These outcasts hanging out with more outcasts and helping each other is exactly what happened. Is exactly the theme of Jesus in the Bible, okay? Because Jesus was hanging out with the outcasts. He was hanging out with the skunks and the old people, the unclean, right? Okay? There are so many levels as to how you can take Jesus hanging out with the unclean. First of all, in real life, Christians are viewed as unclean. Christians are viewed as the monsters, okay? And trust me, hanging out with those outcasts is a good idea. Why did Jesus hang out in the wilderness? Because he wanted to. Why did Elijah hang out in the wilderness? Because he'd rather hang out with a couple of crows than to hang out with you. Cinderella would rather hang out with a couple of rats than hang out with you. Snow White would rather hang out with some little people than hang out with you. John the Baptist would rather sleep on a rock than hang out with you. Okay? Christians are viewed in every race, in every culture, in every time frame. People who follow Christ have always been the real outcasts. Okay? That's the main reason why Jesus is hanging out with outcasts. Okay? He wasn't hanging out with a bunch of rich people, right? A bunch of people were accepted by the rest of the world. Okay? And number two, one of the second reason why the Bible says Jesus was hanging out with the unclean was because let's use the unclean for sinners, because hanging out with sinners is exactly how you're going to save people. Hanging out with preaching to the choir isn't doing that much good, okay? I'm not saying you can't hang out with Christians. I'm saying you just sticking with church and sticking with your church people, you have to go outside your comfort zone and go save people, right? You have to get your hands dirty, all right? So Jesus was hanging out with the unclean to save people. And number 3 is, let's talk about literally being dirty. Okay, let's use that same concept. So in real life, let's talk about how people are literally dirty. Like, if you're a hard worker, you're literally dirty, right? You're outside. If you're a contractor, if you're a construction worker, you are outside and you are dirty. You're not dirty because you're lazy. You're dirty because you're a hard worker. So if you follow Christ, you're supposed to be a hard worker, and you're going to have to get your hands dirty, okay? You're going to have to break some animals. You're going to have to go break some legs. I'm not talking literally, of course, okay? But you're going to have to go out. Jesus hangs out with hard workers. He doesn't hang out with people who stay at home and do nothing, okay? And it's so funny because I'm going to bring that up real fast. If you look at the story of Joseph and his coat of many colors, there's a double meaning there. Because Joseph, that coat of many colors, that Hebrew word there, it could mean something like pajamas, okay? So he was being lazy. He was interpreting dreams and telling his brothers that, one day you're gonna bow to me. So what did God do? God sent him to work, okay? He said, you know what? You're not gonna stay at home and wear your pajamas anymore. You're gonna go outside. You're gonna go outside the temple of my kingdom, and you're gonna go get your hands dirty with those Egyptians, because he was trying to save them, right? Okay. God uses different time frames. He uses culture clash. Okay. So in the Bible, obviously, dressing like an animal could be a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, because it just depends on what culture you're in. So for the Greeks, though, being dressed as an animal meant very lowly. It meant very like a homeless person, okay, or an outcast or a poor person. But God saw like a Viking warrior. Okay, you might view these people preaching on the street, and some of them are literally even homeless. God sees a Viking warrior. He sees Dirty Harry. Okay, he sees someone working hard. He sees a real tough guy. He doesn't see a weak person like the rest of the world sees. Do you still understand what I'm saying? Even in video games, don't you know the little guy, the plumber, was the hero? Even video games are based on these concepts. Like Super Mario starts off little, and when he becomes a big boy, he defeats the enemy, he becomes a big boy, and he levels up from whatever he was before. It's like the same theme everywhere, right? And something even more interesting, Jesus was supposed to be a carpenter, right? Carpenters back then were plumbers, okay? Hint, hint, hint. Alright. Okay, so again, God was using story concepts from back then and now, because they're literally the same story concepts. And I'm not kidding, I believe all this stuff came from God in the first place, and it got twisted around for evil. All these storylines, these story arcs, are here today because they probably came from the Bible and they got twisted around, okay? So I guess I'll start with the Gilgamesh, though. So in the Gilgamesh, okay, so there's Enkidu and the king, okay, his beast. So in this story, so the townspeople, they give this beast a woman, and then they end up, falling in love or something and hooking up, okay? The Gilgamesh gets kind of disgusting, but anyway. So obviously this is a theme now, okay? But God, you don't realize that God uses these stuff. God was using their own stories, just like I'm trying to do now, to try to explain something to you. Of course, this could be evil. You're not supposed to, hook up with the devil, okay? I could easily make that into some evil stuff, which I'll bring up later, okay? But I'm trying to show you what God was trying to do. So this beast meets a woman, and they end up wrestling in the field, okay? If you catch my drift. And then what happens is he dies. Okay? In the story of the Gilgamesh, Enkidu dies. Okay? So the woman lost her beast mate, and the king lost his beast man. Okay? And it's supposed to be really, really sad. Like, he's supposed to be a good beast. Okay? A broken beast. Okay? So again, this concept is in the Bible many, 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 many times. Okay? But it's definitely with both Elijahs, okay? They're both And so in the Gilgamesh, these are both wild men in the wilderness, but they met and they became friends, and one of them dies. That's exactly what happened to Elijah. They're both men, wilderness men out in the wild, okay? And then Elijah dies, okay? Or gets taken away in a whirlwind chariot. It depends on how you read it. That's because God is using all of it, okay? So let's read what happens. Elijah knows that Elijah will be taken from him. And it came to pass when the Lord would take up Elijah into heaven by a whirlwind. And what happens is he dies, okay? Elijah dies, and the other Elijah gets really upset, okay? He gets really mad, okay? And it came to pass as they still went on and talked, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire, horses of fire, that parted them both asunder. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. So he went up into heaven with a whirlwind chariots of fire, okay? And Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, the chariot of Israel, the horsemen thereof. And he saw him no more, and he took off his own clothes and rent them into pieces. And he took up also the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and went back and stood by the bank of Jordan. And he took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and smote the waters, and said, where is the Lord of God of Elijah? And when he also smitten the waters, they parted. Very upset that Elijah dies, his beast man, his other friend in the wilderness, is dead. Okay? And also remember that he leaves behind a piece of clothing. Okay? These are concepts. God is using storylines that were all taken from him, and you are seeing them every day in movies. You're just not connecting the dots. First of all, these stories are trying to get you to relate to yourself, okay? And you're supposed to relate to these people. And you're going to have a million different concepts of what's going on here. It's because God is using all of them, okay? In real life, when people die, do they leave behind a piece of clothing? Yes, and like in the movies, and they cry, okay? Yes, God is using concepts you're seeing every day. And you know, they either keep the clothing and they pass it down to their children, or they let the clothing go in the water, or they get really mad and start tearing things and breaking things because they're mad at God. They're angry that they lost somebody. Okay, you're supposed to relate that to these stories. And not to mention, God uses storylines that these people understood, because back then everyone should have known what the Gilgamesh was, so they could relate to the story. And it's so funny though, because God is still doing that. He's using movie themes that all came from him anyway, to try to get you to realize what is happening, okay? And obviously you can get upset when somebody dies. Obviously it's upset, okay? Jesus cried when John the Baptist died. It's upset, but you have to rein in that monster after a while, otherwise it's gonna turn against you, right? I know sometimes people get angry with God because a loved one dies, but if you don't rein in that monster, it's gonna become a part of you forever, okay? Okay, I know this is gonna be kind of funny and people are gonna think I'm nuts, but oh well, okay. God is literally saying a million stories with these passages, because all people do is repeat stories, right? And they mix them up. So, I'm gonna talk about Elijah's again, okay? They replied, he was a man with a garment of hair and with a leather belt around his waist. So, the Elijahs are depicted as being both hairy or wearing leather of some sort, okay? Because God is trying to explain something to you. And then one of the Elijahs is picked up on a whirlwind chariot. People are going to think I'm so nuts, but oh well. And the storylines are from the ancient world and they repeat. And that's what this is, okay? If you ever seen Star Wars, there are two men in the wilderness, these two outlaws. They became friends, and one of them is literally like a Bigfoot or something, okay? And one of them dies, and then there's a whirlwind chariot. There's a chariot. And it's so funny because people will say that Elijah got picked up by a UFO. I actually don't believe Elijah was picked up by a UFO, but God is using storylines and concepts that you are missing, okay? These stories have repeated themselves over and over and over again ever since the Gilgamesh in the Bible. Alright? They're literally the same stories over and over and over again on purpose, because God is trying to get you to see what's going on. Alright? Okay, obviously in the Bible, when it's talking about a fiery whirlwind, though, it could be talking about a bad thing when it comes to you, right? And to other people, right? This taken away in a fiery whirlwind chariot can be a very bad thing. Because even in some of these false religions, you being taken away in a fiery chariot was a good thing, but it's really a bad thing, right? It could be viewed as you be taken up into hell, right? Or taken down into hell. So again, these stories are in every movies, okay? So I'm going to bring up Terminator. What happens in Terminator, there was a little boy and he meets this monster basically, okay? And he teaches him not to be a monster anymore. He's like, okay, monster, stop shooting people. And he kind of calms him down a little bit. He ends up dying, right? His monster friend ends up dying. He gets sunken down into a whirlwind, okay? A fiery whirlwind. And it's supposed to be really sad. Exact same storyline in Frankenstein. So a creator makes a man, a crazy monster, okay? And what happens in Frankenstein, the creator brings him to life, but he can't get him to grow up because Frankenstein acts like a little kid, right? Just like Terminator acts like a little kid. He can't talk, and the creator can't break him. That's why Frankenstein never got a name, okay? Because the doctor couldn't break him. He wasn't even alive long enough to have a name. So because Frankenstein isn't the name of the monster, it's the name of the doctor. The monster never got a name, alright? That's why in the book of Revelation, God says he gives you a name, okay? Because he broke you. He gives you a stone with a name on it. Okay, he broke you. You have a name now. The creator couldn't give him a name because he couldn't keep him in control. And how it happens at the end of Frankenstein, he ends up dying, right? See how these stories keep repeating and repeating? Obviously, this is a story that's been repeating since the beginning of time. A monster meets a woman, okay? And they either hook up or whatever, okay? So, this is exactly what happened in King Kong. I know this is kind of funny, but I can't help it. That's what I'm seeing here. So, in this story of the Gilgamesh, the villagers give a woman to the beast, and that's exactly what happens in King Kong. The villagers give a woman to this big monster, okay? And at first, they oppose each other, and then they become in league with each other, and then they become like friends, right? They become friendly with each other. But what happens at the end of King Kong? Some whirlwind chariots come and they knock him down, right? And he ends up dying, and it's very, very sad, right? And you can already guess what my point is going to be. This person, yes, sometimes she's a woman. I guess this woman could be the bride of Christ. It could be God's people trying to save everyone. That is true. But this person in all these movies who's been trying to break you and trying to make you not act like a crazy monster has been God the whole time, and people who are working for God. And if you don't stop, he's going to have to put you down, and it is going to be very, very sad. It's not going to be funny, okay? And it is heartbreaking because you think that God won't send you to hell. He will, okay? Most people end up in hell because they do not want to be broken. Get it? And I'm obviously going to end the video with Beauty and the Beast. Okay, and I know I could easily make these movies evil right now, but I'm going to try to do what God's been trying to do with these stories. He's trying to get you to realize something, okay? So if you've ever seen Beauty and the Beast, it's kind of like King Kong. It's kind of like the Gilgamesh, okay? So, and it's kind of like how God broke the beast in the field, which is a human, okay? But what happens is she gets sent off into a castle because there's a curse. He was cursed to become a beast man, just like in the Bible. It's literally what happened to King Nebuchadnezzar, because that's probably where that story comes from. Anyway, he was cursed to become a beast, probably for 9 years or 7, okay? And what happens? She dances with him. She doesn't wrestle with him, but then eventually he becomes broken in a good way, right? And he gets to become a man again. And I hope that's what happens to you. It's choose your own adventure. Which one are you gonna be? Are you gonna be King Kong? Or are you gonna be like Beauty and the Beast, who's broken the curse? She broke his curse, right? Alright, she didn't wrestle with him, she danced with him. And she helped break the curse, right? So I hope that's what happens to you, alright? Not the other version. And of course, these storylines are repeated over and over and over again all throughout these movies. Because God is allowing it to try to wake you up to something, okay? It's so funny, these stories just get repeated again. It's exactly what happens in Twilight, okay? She gets sent off into the woods from a different part of the country. Okay, she gets sent off into the wilderness. She meets a monster, but he doesn't want to be a monster anymore. Okay, and what did I say in the beginning of these concepts come from the ancient world? He in order for him to not be a monster, he had to refrain from eating human flesh, and that's what he does. He doesn't drink human meat, right? It's the exact same stories again and again and again. All right. And by the way, this woman in the wilderness, who's been sent off to this wilderness, like Belle, like Cinderella, like Snow White, this woman who's been sent to defeat the beast is supposed to be you. Okay? This Bride of Christ character isn't supposed to be home in her pajamas. She's supposed to be out there fighting in the wilderness for God. Alright? That's what the book of Revelation is really talking about here. This woman he sent out into the wilderness to help people. Okay, I'm going to say this again. I already said this in previous videos. The Whore of Babylon and the Bride of Christ they're mirror image of each other. They're described as the exact same things, but they're the exact opposite. Okay, so I can easily just say that Bella and Belle were just dancing with the devil, because in real life, unfortunately, these movies are not made for God, and these movies don't direct people to God, okay? But if you read the Bible and then watch some of these movies, you can see that God still uses these concepts a little bit. He's still trying to reach people, right? Because if you don't come to Christ with this information, then Belle and Bella just become Jezebel, okay? They're just dancing with the devil in that case, which unfortunately is what's happening most of the time. Right? Alright, so please think about this stuff, guys, and thank you.